Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to do a commercial feed program pet food manufacturer webinar. This is the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, and we have put this on to go through a number of items that would be pertinent to pet food manufacturers. I'd like to introduce you to our speakers today. I am Heather Bartley, the feed specialist for the state of Wisconsin. I will be moderating today's session and will cover the tonnage and inspection fee reporting segment of today's webinar. Stephanie Statz, our feed and fertilizer label and sampling guru, will be going through the 2017 pet food sampling project results with you. The better part of today's webinar will discuss inspections and will be presented by 5 of our inspectors. Jeff Hansen will start off the inspection section of the webinar with an overview of how enforcement works. Carla Pipping will then cover the building cleanliness expectations of an inspection. Gary Naprala will run through equipment cleanliness and product records. Zach Snowball will discuss pet food label requirements, and Nate Wolf will wrap things up with the pet treat label requirements. Before we get started, I would like to run through a couple housekeeping items. First, please ensure your phones are on mute. In order to get through all of the presentation content, we have reserved time for questions at the end. You are welcome to submit your questions into the chat box as we go, and we will answer those at the end. Today, we are discussing commercial feed requirements specific to pet food in Wisconsin. I'd like to remind everyone that a pet, according to regulation, is either a dog or a cat. Food for specialty pets, other animals typically confined in a household like gerbils, hamsters, small reptiles, some birds, etc., are currently regulated under the livestock commercial feed regulations in Wisconsin. Wisconsin differs from other states in that it does not have a specialty pet food regulation at this time. That said, for today's webinar, we will use the phrases pet food, feed, and commercial feed interchangeably to refer to dog and cat food. With that, we will start by going over the commercial feed tonnage statute changes that took effect on January 1st of 2018. It is important to remember inspection fees and tonnage are 2 different things. The inspection fees are monies collected by the department according to the quantity of pet food sold or distributed. The fee is paid by the business that is first to distribute or sell the feed in or into the state of Wisconsin. Tonnage is the quantity of the pet food itself. Now we'll transition to the manufacturing side of things. Excuse me. Any person who is manufacturing or distributing pet food in or into the state of Wisconsin is required to hold a valid commercial feed license issued by the department. This also applies to persons whose name and address appear on the label of a pet food as the guarantor of that pet food. However, there are 3 exceptions to the licensing requirements. If you distribute pet food as it was packaged and labeled by a licensed manufacturer or distributor, you do not need a license. If you distribute bulk pet food as it was manufactured and labeled by a licensed manufacturer or distributor and repackage the bulk pet food into small containers bearing the same label as the bulk pet food, you do not need a license. The exception to not needing a license for repackaging bulk pet food into smaller containers is when the bulk pet foods are commingled and repackaged. Then a license is required. Third and lastly, if you distribute only custom mixed pet food using ingredients that you purchase from other licensed manufacturers or distributors, you do not need a license. Please remember that a custom mixed pet food is one that is formulated by the pet owner for his or her own pets, and you as the manufacturer are not representing any nutritive guarantees for the pet foods. Remember that retailers are still exempt from licensing. When we talk about retailers, we are referring to entities that merely purchase and resell pet food manufactured and labeled by a third-party pet food company. We also want to clarify that with the statute changes, brokerages and distribution businesses that are first to distribute in or into this state would require a commercial feed license. There is a chance that those entities may have been able to conduct business in the past without being licensed, and we look forward to working cooperatively to notify anyone who may not have needed a license in the past that may need a license going forward. In the past, the very first person to manufacture and distribute a feed or feed ingredient, including pet food, no matter how many times it changed hands, was responsible for reporting tonnage and remitting the inspection fees to the department. In today's world, that is no longer realistic. In layman's terms, the changes that took effect January 1 of 2018 bumped the responsibility to the person or entity that is the first to distribute a commercial feed in or into Wisconsin. In other words, if a pet food moves from the original manufacturer in California to a pet owner in Wisconsin and changes hands 5 times along the way in between California and Wisconsin, the 5th person that sold the pet food to the pet owner in Wisconsin is responsible for reporting the tonnage and remitting the inspection fees. If the pet food was sold out of California to Wyoming, then to Iowa, then to Minnesota, and finally to Wisconsin, the Minnesota firm is responsible for reporting the tonnage and remitting the fees. Again, the 5th transaction is the only one to report the tonnage and remit the fees. Along with the change to the responsibility requirement, several other changes were made to the statute. One change was the implementation of a minimum inspection fee of $50 for 200 ton or less, including distributions of 0 tons. Another change was made to remove the exempt buyer license status option. This means that no licensee may apply for or receive exempt buyer status, regardless of the amount of pet food being exported or distributed out of state. In other words, all licensees will be held to the very same requirements. Finally, all credit reporting requirements were removed. While prepaid purchases are no longer required to be reported to the department, please know you still can reduce your total tonnage by the cumulative total of feed ingredients and pet foods that another licensee first distributed in or into Wisconsin to you. All 4 changes, the responsibility of the tonnage reporting, the minimum inspection fee, the removal of the exempt buyer license status, and the reduced reporting requirements for credits, took effect on January 1, 2018, and are applicable to reports filed in January 2019, as well as January of 2020. One last thing before we switch topics. In 2019 and 2020, the feed program staff worked together with a group of industry members to revise and create some documents to help make reporting tonnage easier. Those documents are available on our website for you to print and use. Now we'll transition to the manufacturing side of things and start by going through pet food surveillance sampling conducted by the department.
During March and April of 2017, the department collected 100 samples of canned and dried dog and cat foods from 22 companies. Manufacturers of the sampled pet foods were located both in and outside of Wisconsin. All samples were collected and purchased at retail pet food locations, and pricing was not a factor in this project. Analysis for each sample included nearly the full array of required nutrients in the AAFCO dog and cat nutrient profiles for maintenance and for growth and reproduction. The nutrient profiles used as standards were selected based on the nutritional adequacy statement on the pet food label. If a food was labeled for all life stages, it was measured against the nutrient profile with the highest nutritive requirements, the growth and reproduction profile. Overall, 85% of samples met the analytical comparison to the AAFCO nutrient profiles. Of the 15 samples that failed to meet the corresponding AAFCO nutrient profile, 10 samples failed to meet only 1 analyte. The comprehensive nutrient profile analysis yielded fails for minerals such as phosphorus, potassium, iron, calcium, and selenium, amino acids, threonine, histamine, and a couple of those others, protein, and vitamin A. Generally speaking, the fails were by a small margin, falling short of the required nutrient amount by tenths or even hundredths of a unit. It should be noted that this project was designed to be only a snapshot of pet food products sold in Wisconsin. The quantity of samples was insufficient to be representative of all pet foods distributed in the state. In addition, the label guarantees were compared to the sample results. Label guarantees can be, and often are, different from the AAFCO nutrient profile requirements for certain nutrients. Not all nutrients in the profiles are guaranteed on the labels. Typically, 4 to 10 guarantees are listed on the label, including the 4 required guarantees of minimum crude protein, minimum crude fat, maximum crude fiber, and maximum moisture. Only nutrients that were both analyzed and guaranteed were assessed for this component of the project. Of the samples, 89 met the label guarantees. Only one of the 11 samples that failed to meet label guarantees failed to meet more than one guarantee. If you have an interest in seeing the detailed data beyond what we've seen today, please visit our website, www.datcp.wi.gov, and go to the Livestock Feed Pet Food page via the Programs and Services menu. The complete report is available in the right-hand menu from the main feed webpage as a PDF file.
Next, we're going to go through pet food, including pet treat manufacturing inspections and what you should expect when your state inspector visits. First, let's cover the enforcement activity related to inspections. Field staff generally try to educate before they regulate and will strive to inform facility staff how to comply before going to verbal or written warnings or civil or criminal fines. It is worth pointing out that the feed program has only recently acquired civil penalty authority in 2017. Prior to that, enforcement actions could only go the criminal penalty route. The department strives for uniformity in all aspects of the feed program. That is related to what the field staff inspect for, what they're looking to see, or what they expect to see, and how they utilize enforcement action when there is a violation. All that said, multiple factors have an impact on enforcement decisions, such as employee turnover, compliance history, type of violation, severity of violation, and most importantly, the health and safety risk to animals and people. In some cases, companies have multiple facilities, and that can play a role in the important enforcement action decision as well. Let's move on to what to expect from an inspection so that enforcement actions don't have to be a decision with an inspection at your facility. Every pet food manufacturer inspection has 4 key aspects. The main things an inspector will look for are a current feed license, cleanliness of your buildings and equipment, proper record keeping and retention of records, and adequate labels for all pet foods and feed ingredients.
When the inspector first arrives at your facility, he or she will request to meet with the most responsible person on site. The most responsible person and possibly other employees will be interviewed for the duration of the inspection and will be expected to answer or acquire an answer related to the good manufacturing practice standard operating procedures in use at your facility. Initially, the inspector will do a walkthrough of the facility to look at the cleanliness and maintenance of the buildings and equipment inside and out. The inspector will look to ensure that there is minimal to no evidence of rodents, vermin, birds, or insects. Part of that will include an overview of pest control. If your facility uses its own pest control, our inspectors are educated in the use of pesticides and can answer any compliance questions you may have related to the use of pesticides in an animal food producing facility. Your inspector will be firm on requesting cleanup when necessary, especially with today's heightened awareness of biosecurity related to avian influenza, African swine fever, and other infectious diseases. Inspectors are looking to ensure physical contaminants or potential adulterants like stored pesticides, fertilizers, non-food grade grease, or cleaning compounds are stored in a separate segregated area. During the outside walkabout, the inspector will be looking for areas that may harbor pests or grant access to your facility, such as significant holes or openings in the wall or floor or overgrown foliage. This photograph demonstrates what we're talking about on the outside of a facility: overgrowth of plants. Not only does the foliage provide a place for pests to reside, it could also hide access points for rodents and other vermin to access the interior of the building. Similarly, in the top left of this photo, we see a stack of pallets leaning against the wall. Rodents love to live in those types of materials, especially when there is an access point down the wall, like the holes in the tin of this building in the center of the picture. A wet floor is a strong hint to an inspector that there is a roof leak. Sometimes facilities do wet cleaning and the water on the floor is not because of a leaky roof. Obviously, leaks can damage the integrity of packaging and cause bags to tear and spill or mold the feed. Loading and unloading areas commonly experience bird activity because doors can be opened for extended periods of time. Inspectors will look to see that the bird population and activity is controlled as much as possible. Bird droppings carry diseases like histoplasmosis, which can cause high fever, blood abnormalities, pneumonia, and even death in humans. Facilities have instituted a variety of methods to control birds: nets, plastic flaps over doors, and visual repellents like plastic predators or reflective bird diverters. The indoor and outdoor walkabout will include a look at spillage from ingredient and finished pet food transfers via bags, legs, bins, loading areas, and unloading areas. Spills, such as the ones in this photo, must be cleaned up. The spilled feed attracts the pests we are striving so hard to keep away, and it can be a source of mold. Dust or residue from regular manufacturing activities is expected and acceptable. However, inspectors are taught to see the difference between fresh accumulations and buildup from a long period of time. Remember, the best way to demonstrate an SOP is to have the documentation to support it. It is acceptable if your facility is apparently undergoing regular cleaning without a document to substantiate the routine housekeeping. Remind employees to keep an eye open for broken, ripped, and torn containers. Sometimes they come that way from the suppliers. Other times, someone is texting and driving the forklift. Your inspector is going to work with you. However, they want to see effort at ensuring spills get cleaned up promptly.
After reviewing the housekeeping, your inspector will look for adequate procedures related to equipment cleanout. The procedures shall be established and used for all equipment used in the production and distribution of pet foods to avoid unsafe contamination and a standard of cleanliness. In other words, your inspector is looking to hear about, see production and controlled procedures that prevent unsafe contamination of current batches of pet food by residual feed material in mixers, legs, bins, trucks, baggers, and other equipment. Sequencing, flushing, and physical cleanout are acceptable ways to mitigate the potential risks. Mixers are the obvious piece of equipment when it comes to flushing, sequencing, and physical cleanout. Manufacturing with raw meat and vegetables can create buildup quickly due to the high moisture content. Please take that into consideration when establishing equipment cleanout procedures. It may mean that your facility has to tweak the cleanout frequency based on the ingredients in specific batches. Production records serve two main purposes. The first purpose for production records is to enable your facility to conduct a recall of specific batches of pet food should an issue arise with any ingredient used in that pet food. Recently, with the creation of the Federal Reportable Food Registry, we hear about recalls related to vitamin levels and other issues. For smaller firms, recalls are still a concern. For example, a flour recall occurred in September 2019 with Gold Medal brand flour. dog treats containing the flour in question should be considered in such a recall. Would the issue with the flour be consequential to dog consuming your treats? If so, good production and distribution records would be essential in recalling the dog treats manufactured by your company. Typically, if it isn't written down on paper, then your inspector is hard-pressed to have the evidence to show that your facility completed the steps. Remember to track production on paper so you are able to show your inspector that you do sequence and flush your mixers, if and where applicable. That wraps up the Good Manufacturing Practices, or GMPs, portion of our webinar. Let's take a 5-minute break so you can grab coffee before we start on the labeling section of today's presentation.
Okay, we will take about 5 minutes here if you guys want to just step away from your computers for a minute, and we will return in 5 minutes. Okay, let's get ready to go through labels. As I mentioned earlier, this segment is going to go through the requirements for pet food labels, and it will be led by Zach Snowball.
All right. During the course of an inspection, as a matter of standard procedure, inspectors will request 4 pet food labels to review for compliance. In addition, the inspector will request formulas for 2 of the 4 labels. I'll get into the reason behind the formula request in an upcoming slide. As you can see from the slide on your screen, a number of components are required of a pet food label. Some of the components have a specific requirement related to the location, and some do not. The ones that do have a location requirement are the brand and or product name, the dog or cat identifier, and net quantity. All 3 of those label components are required to be on the principal display panel of the label. The principal display panel is the panel of the package or container that is displayed to the consumer on the retail shelf. According to federal regulations, the net quantity statement must be in the bottom 1/3 of the principal display panel. The brand and or product name and the dog cat identifier can be anywhere on the principal display panel. The rest of the required components, the ingredient list, the guaranteed analysis, calorie content, use directions, nutritional adequacy statement, and manufacturer information can be elsewhere on the package. The ingredient list shall be one continuous list of approved feed ingredients in descending order from predominance by weight. In other words, the ingredients are to be listed from most to least. When technical additives are in the feed, such as preservatives or flavorings, they shall be parenthetically identified as such. In addition, if an ingredient is added for purposes of a specific nutrient, such as omega fatty acids, that ingredient shall also be parenthetically identified as such. The guaranteed analysis on a pet food must include the crude protein, crude fat, crude fiber, and moisture values. If any claims are made on the label regarding specific nutrients, those must also be guaranteed. For example, if a label claims presence of vitamins A and D3, then vitamins A and D3 must be guaranteed. The calorie content on a pet food label in Wisconsin is an optional label component. That said, the Association of American Feed Control Officials, or AAFCO, Pet and Specialty Pet Model Regulations require the calorie content on pet food, treats, snacks, and supplements. Typically, labels of pet food, treats, snacks, and supplements distributed in Wisconsin include the calorie content because the same label is used for the items when distributed in other states. Including the calorie content is not in conflict with Wisconsin regulations, as long as it is in the correct format, which is metabolized energy, or ME, expressed kilocalories per kilogram or kilocalories per cup. Next, feeding directions are required and are to be written eloquently enough to ensure safe and effective use of the pet food. Please keep in mind that AAFCO Pet and Specialty Pet Food Model Regulations have more specific stipulations regarding the use directions. As with the calorie content, following the more specific stipulations of the feeding directions is not in conflict with Wisconsin regulations and will be acceptable. The nutritional adequacy statement is a required label component and must be on the label verbatim to the language in the regulation. Wisconsin law has not been updated in some time and does not include the nutritional adequacy statement language from the HAPCO pet and specialty pet model regulations about the growth of large-sized dogs. If your company is current with the APCO pet and specialty pet model regulations related to the nutritional adequacy statement, Wisconsin will use regulatory discretion and allow the updated version of the statement. Finally, the label claims and graphics that are extra and not required information can be anywhere on the label, provided these items are not false, deceptive, or misleading. After the field inspector completes their inspection report and turns it into the Madison office, a more in-depth label review is conducted by the Madison office staff to ensure ingredients are listed in the correct order, all the ingredients are approved for pet food, and the claims are truthful, among other things.
Pet treat labels differ slightly from pet food labels. We'll walk through the requirements for dog and cat treats now, and I promise not to get so long-winded during this slide. I'll remind you once more that the word pet, according to the regulatory definition, only refers to dogs and cats. Similar to the pet food manufacturer inspection, inspectors collect 4 labels for review during a pet treat manufacturer's inspection. If your firm does not have 4 different labels, the inspector will just collect what you have. Treat labels are a bit simpler than pet food labels because the calorie content, use directions, and nutritional adequacy statement are not necessarily required. With the optional information aside, the label components that are required for a pet treat label follow the same vein of requirements as pet food labels. Just like pet food labels, pet treat labels are required to display the product and or brand name, whether the treat is for dogs or cats, and the net quantity on the principal display panel. Remember, the federal regulation requires the net quantity to be in the bottom 1/3 of the label. The manufacturer can include their company name and address, the guaranteed analysis with the crude protein, crude fat, crude fiber, and moisture values, an ingredient statement listing approved ingredients from the most to the least, and the use directions, if included, anywhere else on the label. Finally, the label claims and graphics, which are considered optional information, must be truthful and not false, deceptive, or misleading. It is up to the manufacturer as to whether or not they include the calorie content of their treats. Some do and some do not. Wisconsin will allow either decision as long as the proper format is followed. Use directions typically are not required for treats. However, it does slightly depend on the type of treat. The treat is more of a supplement that needs divvying up in order to safely and effectively feed the pet. The Madison staff may follow up and request use directions to be included on the label. Lastly, for a treat or supplement, a nutritional adequacy statement is not expected. However, a manufacturer may opt to include a statement that says this product is intended for intermittent or supplemental feeding only. If you wish to learn more about developing a pet food or treat labels, please watch the Association of American Feed Control Officials website, AFCO.org. AFCO holds labeling workshops for varying types of labels prior to its annual and mid-year meetings. AFCO also offers a pet and specialty pet food labeling guide for purchase on their website, a spiral booklet that goes into quite a bit of detail related to the requirements for the pet and specialty pet labels. Earlier, Zach mentioned that our inspectors will request a copy of 2 formulas that correspond to 2 of their 4 labels selected for further review during the inspection. From these formulas, the Madison staff will be able to determine if the ingredients in the ingredient statement of the finished pet food are listed in the correct order. In addition, paperwork collected by the field staff during their ingredient verification for the 2 formulas requested will enable the Madison staff to verify that the ingredients listed on the finished pet food label are listed correctly according to the ingredients used. For an example, if an inspector used the ingredient list off the treat label on the previous slide to determine that instead of flex seed oil, the firm was actually using flex seeds, the Madison staff would be able to work with the facility to correct the ingredient statement pictured on this slide so that it will accurately reflect the physical ingredients used to manufacture the dog treats.
Thanks, Nate. All right, we will start to open up the line for questions. If you have any questions, there are currently no questions in the chat box, but if you do have any questions, I will allow you all to unmute yourselves and ask that question. So we're not hearing any questions, and I'm not seeing anything get entered in the chat box. Clearly, our email addresses are here on the slide. You're more than welcome to ask specific questions to myself, Stephanie, or the Feed, Fertilizer, and Containment Unit Supervisor, Andrew Del Santo. You also are more than welcome to contact your inspector in your area. The link to finding out who your inspector would be, if you are located in the state of Wisconsin, of course, is at the bottom of the slide. We will hang out here for a couple minutes to see if anybody has any questions. You just have to unmute yourself in order to ask that question. We will also be sending out a survey for feedback after this webinar. We sure appreciate your couple of minutes that you take to complete that survey. We're also using the results of that survey for a separate project related to the tonnage reporting, and would really appreciate you taking a couple minutes to make sure you answer those questions and send that feedback back to us. Again, you can ask any specific questions that you don't want to ask in front of the crowd, either directly to one of us via email, or you could submit it via the survey that will come out here shortly. Hearing no questions, we would thank everyone for their participation today. And again, thank you in advance for your feedback via the survey, and we will end the webinar at this time.